Hello and welcome to week 20 of the Based on Balls podcast. I'm joined alongside Connor as we are now at the end of the regular season. It has been a very interesting season, a very fast season, I feel like. I don't know about you, Connor. I know you've been a mainstay on this show for basically every week, but I feel like this season flew by. I mean, it like a blink of an eye, it was March and we are getting ready for week one. We have now finished the second season of this new kind of revitalized, or not revitalized, more of like this changed Giant League Memorial League. At least the regular season, I'd say we still have the playoffs. But I thought, it was a very interesting regular season, a very, you know, competitive regular season. I thought there was a lot of parity this year, more so than last year. There'll be a whole award section that I assume we will do at the end of the postseason when that concludes. But yeah, we wrapped up the regular season. We're gonna touch the last 2 weeks because there wasn't a podcast the week before, but we will more so focus on this week. But there is one matchup I do want to talk about from the previous week that I think will be insightful, especially for the postseason coming up. But before we get into it, Connor, how are you doing? Obviously, your team didn't make it to the playoffs, but how do you feel about your season as a whole, and how do you think this regular season went? Your second year as well as mine in the Johnny Lee Memorial League, our second regular seasons. Excuse me.
Yeah, it's been a great time having been in the league for 2 years now. And I mean, there's still been some updates to the owners, but I think now we have nearly the perfect formula. As for my team, I'm very pleased with it. It is disappointing to not make the playoffs and have a losing record, but going into the year, I was consistently projected for the 13th or 14th spot in the league, and I think I'm going to end up with a 9 seed going 7-13. So I'm pleased with my progress and really hope that the team can be a bit more competitive next year.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely think you took strides in the right direction. I think I alluded to it a bit earlier. I feel like I still think there's a gap between the really elite teams and obviously not as elite teams, but I think that gap has shrunk a bit. There was a couple of big upsets this season. I thought, you know, I thought the top echelon of the league, while they were, won most, if not most of the regular season games, it wasn't, we didn't see a John Height last year who literally just never lost a single game throughout the regular season playoffs. I felt like there was a lot more competitiveness around the board. But we'll briefly go over week 19. I'll touch on the scores of the matchups we're really not going to go into because I feel like we just be repeating ourselves at this point. Myself, the Clearwater Beach Dogs took down the Bismarck Larks 672-348. Chad's Oklahoma City 89ers took down Connor's Amarillo Saw Poodles 440 or 644 to 443. Jav's Portland Sea Dogs took down the Richmond Flying Squirrels 741-402. John Heights Hartford Yargoats took down Dave's Rochester Red Wings 805 to 643. Paul's Norfolk Tie took down Homco's Rocket City Trash Pandas 578 to 467. And then Bry's Rocky Mountain Vibes took down Smells El Paso Chihuahuas 687 to 354. There was one matchup that I did not go over, and I wanted to touch a bit about this. Since it happened last week, we won't go as in depth, but I think it is something that's important, especially for the context of both of these teams. And that was Cody's Bowling Green Hot Rods taking on Tita's Nashville Sounds 702 to 672. Tita could not get the win. It was very close. Cody was able to pull away on Sunday night, I believe, if I remember correctly. But, Tita had been a team that he started really hot. He actually, was the first team to take down John Height. I think he started 4-0, if I'm not mistaken. But, it seemed like the wheels had kind of fallen off a bit. And obviously, personally, with, Tita becoming a head coach, and kind of his time being taken away from the league, he still was in the mix, especially after getting that huge win against Chad. I think it was week 18 or 17, but it just seemed like he kind of lost his form. Still made the playoffs, but it just didn't seem like his form was there. This was a huge week just being competitive. Obviously, he would have loved the win. And then when you're looking at Cody, 702, still a very good score, but I mean, looking else at a lot of the other teams around the league, it would have lost to Jab's team and John Height as well. But 702 isn't, especially when you're talking about the elite teams, isn't a score that's guaranteed to win, as we'll look, foreshadowing my own personal matchup from this past week. But Connor, what did you see in this matchup? I thought it was pretty impressive that T was able to hang in there, and I thought there was a lot of balance from the pitching and hitting, which we haven't really seen consistently this season. And then Cody able to get done, but I think especially as we're getting to the playoffs, you'd want a little bit more from your team. Obviously, now that the playoffs have started, it's basically a clean slate. But Connor, what do you think of this matchup?
Yeah, so I do think that the parity is incredibly impressive for Tita. 338 offensive points, 334 pitching. For Cody, it's 353 and 349. And having 300 pitching points is, I think, important to being competitive. But Paul likes to say, oh, a good team has like good starting pitching and a great team has an awesome bullpen. When we really get into the upper echelon of teams, the conversation more goes around to Jab scoring 500 offensive points or Height showing 450, doing the spectacular. And I'm not sure if there is too much of a wow factor in this matchup. Cody's going to have the bye week one, so 700 points is a little bit low. I mean, there are some cool offensive performances. Juan Soto was 70 for Cody, 61 for Ian Happ for Tita, but everything else was just kind of solid. And I think both teams would want a little more pizzazz in their playoff endeavors.
Yeah, definitely, indeed. A couple of things to point out. One, Bowden Francis for Tita, 90 points in a 2-star week, and then he had a 54-point start on Saturday, August 24th against the Angels. So he's been someone who, 54, 44, 46 in his last 3 starts. We talk about aces, and obviously I'm not considering Bowden Francis an ace, but in a 3-week stretch where if you can get a pitcher, especially of Francis's caliber, to give you 40 plus for his next 3 or 4 starts, that could be the difference between a win or a loss. So that's something to very much look out for, really hitting his stride. And then for Cody, we talked about, especially with the trade of Juan Soto, losing some of his depth, suffered injuries to both Hunter Green and Zach Eflin. They could come back for his week 1 or week 2 playoff, excuse me. So the bye is actually really helping him here. Looks like Zach Eflin is expected to return on September 1st. We don't know to what avail. And then Hunter Green is dealing with some inflammation in his elbow. He could be done for the year, which would be a huge loss to Cody. He has really broken out this season for the Cincinnati Reds. Really hit, I think, that ace level form that a lot of people were projecting. Finally put it all together for a season, but just getting hurt at the worst time. Connor, if you got anything else to add, I think those injuries are huge for him. And then he also lost Hector Neris, who got released. He was one of his relievers he was working with, kind of like his 4th reliever, so not a huge loss, but it is something to note. Got anything else to add, Connor, before we go into this week's previous matchups?
Yeah, not really. I think Hector Neris was on my team for 4 months, and after a while, I just kind of had it. So, given that Cody has Miller, 3 other closers, I think any starting pitching that can come back he's going to have the bye, but for 2 weeks from now, it's going to be very helpful. But I think despite only having 700 points in week 19, I think Cody's going to be performing just fine.
Yeah, gets the win. Like you said, gets the number 1 seed. We'll go over the final standings before previewing this week's matchup. But there are 3 matchups I wanted to get into for this week. I'll go over the ones that we're not going to really touch over. Connor, ending off the season with a W. Congratulations, as your Amarillo Poodles take down Smells El Paso Chihuahuas in the Good Boy Bowl, 511 to 365. I should also mention week 20 was added this year. It was an additional week. It was the quote-unquote rivalry week. So a lot of narrative spinning around. More, I think, that were more heavily weighed so than others, but that was one I know, especially the Good Boy Bowl, is something that we've talked about for a bit. Bracton taking down Cody, taking down Bracton's Bismarck Larks 701 to 533 in the battle of 2 of the 3 LMs. Paul's Norfolk Tides taking down Scott's Richmond Flying Squirrels 598 to 281. Paul, I know, was struggling against Scott last season, got the better of him, especially in this matchup. And then Dave's Rochester Red Wings taking down Homco's Rocket City Trash Bandits 623 to 358. There are three matchups I want to get into. The first matchup I want to get into as part of rivalry week, John Heights, Hartford Yargoats, once again getting the better of my Clearwater Beach Dogs, 855 to 764. Connor, I'll actually give you the floor first. What do you think of this matchup?
My heart breaks for the Beach Dogs here. Up until Friday, this looked like a potential upset, but John's team just came on pretty late. Consistency was still had here, 3A1 to 3A3 hitting and pitching for you. And John's pitching had 379, but going to the wow factor. 476 points from offense. There are only one or two teams in the league that can put up that number consistently from a pitching or a hitting side. I do think that your team is still positioned very well for the playoffs, and curious to see what happens there. Yainer Diaz on Sunday Night Baseball is wrapping up a 58-point week. He's been a revelation in the last 2 months. Giancarlo Stanton, hopefully he can repeat like a 47-ish point week. Patrick Corbin, don't get me started, actually doing well. But John's offense is one of a kind. He went undefeated last year for a reason, and his team popped off when it was needed the most. So hopefully you will get some revenge in the playoffs, but I think the team that had more of a wow factor for a specific hitting versus pitching category won.
Yeah, and I mean, so like you mentioned, I was leading this matchup for basically the entire week. Friday, I was out, I think I was up by around 100. John pulled away on Saturday, or John, I think Friday was when it was getting close. John Hyde pulled away on Saturday, and then Sunday was kind of the nail in the coffin. You alluded to it. I think, I mean, in terms of pitching, balanced effort from my team, 383 from the arms, 380 from the bats. Good overall. And I mean, 763 would have beaten every single team except for John and then Bry as well. 383, I feel like if you get that amount of points from your arms is something you just really can't complain at all. And 380 from the bats, I thought was pretty solid. Like you said, I didn't really get a wow factor performance. Yainer Diaz led the way at 58, but if you're looking at John Heights' team, the difference was three guys. Aaron Judge, who is just continuing another historic season, put up 110 points, 7 homers in 1 week is ridiculous. Shohei Ohtani just got a 40-40 season. He had 72 as well. Batted 333 on the year, or on not on the year, on the week with 3 extra base hits and 3 stolen bases as well. And then Francisco Lindor has really been catching fire recently. 77 points out of him. Those 3 players outscored my top bat and led to John Hyde with that 476 mark. But something else I want to point out, we've talked, I think the big narrative going on this year with John's team was that his pitching really wasn't up to standards. This week came out in spades, 379, absolutely dominant. If he is, putting up his 400s, 400s, high 400s, like 450 plus with his bats, and it gets, 300, 350 from the arms, he's not going to lose in the playoffs. Obviously that's not been the case all year. But I mean, absolute great performance from his arms. The only one with a negative start was Corbin Burns, surprisingly, who had a -5. Ronald Blanco just, didn't have a great start either at 3 points, but everyone else was, in the double digits, a couple of them with, 35, 40-point starts. Just absolutely dominance from the arms from John Hyde. Once again, cementing his case as potentially the favorite going into these playoffs. Second matchup I want to talk about is actually an upset as Chad's Oklahoma City 89ers take down Jab's Portland Sea Dogs 621 to 540. Absolutely shocking stuff out of Jab here. He's someone who I think he's been, the second, third best team in the league. He's definitely been in that top 4. Someone who I think just consistently put the pedal to the metal, but this week just didn't really get it done. I think it comes down to the arms, 180 points. That will not win you any weeks, let alone in the playoffs. His bats still did solid at 360, but Chad, dominant performance from his arms, 336, and his bats still did what they need to do at 285. I think Bry was the one who made the comment saying if there's ever a week for Jab to have an off week, it's when, obviously he's still battling for playoff seeding, but, he secures playoff spot. It's not the playoffs yet. You can take this off week, you can take this bad week and then hope you don't get it for the next 3 weeks. But, we've talked about Chad, kind of cementing, trying to fight for a playoff spot. Didn't get it, but taking down, a contender with a solid performance on his end. But I think this team performance is more indicative of Jabs, not really living up to the standards he's been held to this entire year.
Yeah, I mean, we've come on this podcast almost every week and being saying, "Oh, Jab scored 400 offensive points. He scored 450, 500." So 360. I mean, that's certainly a comparable number to what other playoff teams have scored over the last 2 weeks, but not the wow factor. And I don't know about the pitching. I mean, there was just some duds. Tanner Houck, 21 points in the 2-point start. Bryce Miller with 11 in a year where he's been averaging 21.4. Gavin Williams with 3. I don't know if this is a one-off. I do think that this Chad team had a harder way to the playoffs. We thought that he might be able to get over Tita, and this shows, I think, the 89ers are going to be very competitive. The thing I'm mostly going to be looking out for is all of the injured pitchers currently on Tita's team. When do they get back? When does Ketel Marte get back? Jacob deGrom is currently on a rehab assignment. Will they be able to help him in time for an immediate matchup, or is it going to be too little too late?
Yeah, and I mean, something else also to make note of, Yordan Alvarez is listed as day-to-day, but he has not played the last 3 games due to, neck tight, or they're calling it, neck discomfort, neck discomfort. I mean, for the sake of just Jab's team, and I think baseball as a whole, Yordan Alvarez is one of the most exciting players in the league. But we also saw an injury this year with Kyle Tucker, where, I mean, I know personally where they were considering him day to day, and then it became week to week, and he's been out since the beginning of July. Right now, he's listed as day to day, but he's missed the last 3 games. He's still dealing with this neck injury. Even if he's out for the next week, that's Jab's best bat or second best bat just out of his lineup. And especially, in a playoff game where the margin of error is so small, losing a guy like that, even for half the week or the full week, might be something that Jab can't overcome, especially with the injury to Ketel Marte as well that he's been dealing with.
And one other point I'll bring up, Will Smith has been averaging 3.4 fantasy points over the last 30 days. He has been a second or third tier catcher the last 2 or 3 months. So he traded me Ryan Jeffers, and I could see in between Ketel Marte being injured at second and Smith's performance there a couple more weak spots than we normally expect from the Sea Dogs.
Yeah, for Jab's case, you hope this is a one-off. And he did have, I think he had, if I remember correctly, he scored well into the 700s the week before. So this could just be an off week, but there are some signs that this could carry into next weekend's matchup as well. But the final matchup I want to go over, it was the Rocky Mountain Vibes versus the Nashville Sounds. Bry taking down Tita 787 to 725. And if you loved this matchup and are excited to see it, you're going to be getting again the next matchup, as these two teams will take on each other 4 times in a row, including 2 straight weeks. So that'll be something to note. Bry getting it done in the end. 409 points from the arms, just ridiculous stuff from him. 378 from the bats, and Tita was there neck and neck. 367 from the arms, 358 from the bats, but both those numbers were less than Bry's. Could not pull it out in the end. But another strong performance from Tita. That 725 mark, if you're looking at who else made the playoffs, would have beaten Jab, would have beaten Paul, would have beaten Cody. Doesn't beat Bry this week, but that's a score where, depending on how the chips fall, could get him a win. And that's 2 very competitive performances against championship contender teams, Tita could just not pull it out in either matchup.
Yeah, my one critique of Tita's teams typically is what is the ceiling? It seems like there are very few 800 or 900 point show offs. They're just very competitive, but not outstanding outputs. So 725 is comparable to it would have been competitive, but we were just also saying that Cody's had 701 back-to-back weeks, and that's not what would be needed for the playoffs. So I do think this is encouraging for the Sounds. Bry's team's probably on a better level, I'd say, but I think still this is encouraging, but more would need to be seen for me to consider Tita to have a serious upset shot.
No, I think I agree with that. And actually, I think Dean Creamer just got credit with the win. So add another 6 points, to Tita's total. So it's 787 to 731. I agree. I think Bry's been a team that's been consistently hitting that 700 mark. And we saw last year where, a 7 seed comes in and beats a 2 seed. I think the last 2 years at least. I know it happened, our first year in the league, and then it happened the year before, I believe, where the 7 seed beat the 2 seed. Could very well happen again, especially because you're now looking at a 1-week sample where, essentially anything could happen. But I agree with you. I think, especially with the pitching of Bry's team, it's just been so consistent. And the bats, while they can be hit or miss at times, they're good enough to where, his arms are just so rock solid that you just need good bat production, I think, to keep it a vote. But you never know. He could catch Bry on a bad week. Matchups, his, starting matchups for Bry aren't as advantageous as Tita's. Maybe he, a guy he expects to get like 25 points from, 30 points from in a start, like a Tarek Screwball gets blown up. Not saying it will happen, but it could very well happen. And that really throws a wrench into everything. But we'll definitely see. But before we preview the matchups, I want to go over the regular season standings for the season. We'll go from worst to best. 14th place was Bracton at 3-17. Homco was tied with him at 3-17 as well. Scott finished in 12th at 4-16, followed by Smell at 5-15. Dave and Connor were tied at 9th at 7-13. Connor with the tiebreaker. Chad at 10-10, tied with Tita, but Tita with the head-to-head matchup ends up getting the playoff spot. Chad actually finished with more points for than Tita, but that win was huge and was able to catapult him up to the top echelon. Paul in the 6th spot at 12-8. Myself at 12-7-1. Jab at 16-4 with tied with John Height, but John Height gets the tiebreaker due to the head-to-head matchup, and he also had more points for. Bry sitting at the 2nd seed at 17-3, and then Cody getting the number 1 seed at 17-2-1. So that is the standings for the regular season. I think it's pretty accurate to what a lot of people predicted. I don't think really anyone fell or rise. I think for myself, I thought I was going to be in the top 3, but dealt with some injuries. I think had to do some reshuffling. The points for is in that in that category. I'm just behind Jab, but the record wasn't indicative of that. I think that was really the only crazy part about it. I think Connor, you outperformed your standings by a pretty good margin. I think a lot of teams had you in that 12 to 13 range. You finished tied for 9th. And got some pretty impressive wins as well. But I think everything else shook into place properly. From what I remember, I could be wrong. But that is the regular season, the 2024 regular season. And now it is on to the playoffs. So when we do these things, we do these previews, we kind of, because there's so much more, we don't really get into the weeds of it. But I think, obviously, because it's a one-and-done series, a one-and-done matchup, if you win, you advance. If not, you lose. We're going to go a little more in depth into these matchups, and I'm going to say for each team, Connor, I think I want to go with an MVP, someone who you think we can go MVP for both arms or bats, or if you want to do one, that's fine. but I also want to get an X factor, someone who, depending on how they play, can really change the dynamics of the entire matchup. So I think we will start with the Rocky Mountain Vibes versus the Nashville Sounds. We'll kind of continue our previous conversation. We talked about how Bry, seems to be the favorite, but what is the angle for Tita to win? And who would you say is his X factor and his MVP that could lead to a potential win?
So, to be clear, I do think that Bry is the better team and he is going to win this, but Tita has been very consistent the last couple weeks when he's been back on. The last 2 weeks, Bowden Francis has gone absolutely bananas. The last 3 starts have had 46, 44, and 54 pitching points. That is crazy for a man who lost his rotation spot earlier in the year. If he can put that up again, then that would help buoy Tita's pitching compared to Bry's, where I think Bry has a very clear advantage. Byron Buxton is a guy who's currently on Tita's injured list that, if he was healthy, I would think would potentially go off. Tia's outfield of TJ Friedel, Ian Happ, Alex Verdugo, and Lourdes Gurriel is fine, but not spectacular. Happ did have a good week, but if there was an X factor like Buxton, I think that would do it a whole lot more. For a healthy, true MVP, I'm going to refrain from giving a specific one because Tita, until 3 weeks ago, changed his team so much. I will say that Yandy Diaz is the consistent old first baseman that is absolutely the kind of guy Tita's looking for, and hopefully can push some offensive points.
Yeah, that point on Bowden Francis is a pretty good one because, I mean, looking at the just the breakdown of the pitching staffs, Tita's, Bryce's is superior, and it's not really particularly close. Actually, if I can get the breakdown of their pitching points totals, I think Bry came up in second in terms of pitching fantasy points this season. Yeah, he finished at 6.849. Tita down at 5.5385. That's a difference of 1,500 across 20 weeks. We can do some quick maths on this one real quick. That's 75 less point or 75 more points in favor of Bry, every week for the entire season. We know obviously Tita likes to wheel and deal, has, with the trade deadline passing, has a static team now, but still the pitching has just been consistently in favor of Bry, and the margin's pretty apparent. But if Francis can get just one more great start, he's playing a Boston team that definitely has been on the hotter side recently. It's not like they're a lead offense, but they definitely have been doing, they're definitely in the upper half of the MLB. We'll see how likely it is. Kind of looking at his starts that were so hot, the past couple of starts, played against the Angels twice, who are not that great, and then also the Cubs, who aren't really that good either. Now he's going to be playing, the best offense he's seen in a couple of weeks. How that affect that, I'm not entirely sure. I also don't know his stats against Boston this year to really compare to see how he's done. But I agree with you. If he's someone who can, just get it, if he's someone who can put in another, 35, 40 point star, which I know is asking a lot, but you really need that kind of performance against Bry from a guy like Francis if you want a chance to win, especially when your arms just aren't at the level of his. That's what he's going to need to get done for this. And then in terms of, an MVP, I would actually say I think someone who's been consistently producing for Tita's team, or at least, might have been on and off for a while. Ian Happ has been pretty consistent for him. Didn't have a great week last week, but has been a very solid bat, almost a 6 point per game bat for him. On a Cubs team that just really didn't really get it going, maybe with some higher expectations, kind of fell off. Ian Happ has been consistent for him. almost at an 800 OPS with 23 homers and 72 RBIs. He's someone who I don't know. I couldn't tell you how long Tita has rostered him, but I feel like he's rostered him for a good minute, or at least he rostered him at least multiple times. I know you had him for a while, Connor, but I think that's someone who I would identify as an MVP for him. Um, Also, something to note. You mentioned that Byron Buxton's not healthy. There was a report that he could have potentially played this past weekend against the Cardinals. He obviously didn't, but he is making, quote unquote, steady progress. We'll see if that means he gets activated, but he could potentially have him for some part of this week, which would obviously be huge because we've talked about his outfielding core. Not really that great outside of Ian Happ. Alex Rodriguez has been infamously horrible this year, and then TJ Friedel's been all right. So we'll see how that is. And then also, I just got the stat: Bowden Francis had one appearance against the Red Sox. Didn't even start, but he had one innings pitched, didn't strike out any batters, didn't give up any runs. So basically, we're working on nothing right now for Bowden Francis against the Red Sox, and we'll see how he does. But for Bry, we'll do the same thing. Obviously, we know he is the favorite. The favorite. I think the pitching has a lot to do with it, but he still has great bats in his own right. Who would you consider, the MVP of Bry's team for the season, and then who's an X factor for, not only I would say just this matchup against Tita, but who could be the X factor for him, winning it all in the postseason?
If Bry wins it all, it is because Tariq Skubal and Cole Ragans did what they needed to do. Bry came in at a great time to get those or strategically acquire them. They are the two main horses, in my opinion. Pablo Lopez and Kevin Gausman have really not performed as well as expected. So those two, I think, are really going to stand out. For a MVP, I will say Rafael Devers, 865 points, just became the youngest Red Sox to hit 200 home runs or some statistic like that. And the X factor for me is the Colorado Rockies outfielders. Last year, Nolan Jones was a 2020 player and a rising star. This year, he's been injured. So what does Bry do? He gets another Rockies outfielder in Brenton Doyle that is currently having a 2020 season. They may not have either the name value or the consistency, but if they can put in a couple steals and provide some power here and there, I think that's going to be terrific. Ozzy's out for at least the next week or two, so that's going to be disappointing, but Maikel Garcia has definitely been a good fill-in at second as well.
Yeah, I think I'm going to go with a couple. I like the Rafael Devers as the offensive MVP. I mean, he scored the most points for Bry and average, I believe, the most points per game. So that's a pretty good shout. I'll say for the arms, Tariq Skubal is the MVP as well. I mean, I think he's going to win the AL Cy Young. A nearly 31 point per game arm, 802 points in total. But I think there are two X factors I'm really looking for. Obviously, this is, if Cole Ragans and Tariq Skubal do what they can do, but I'm going to go for the pitching. I think Ranger Suarez is one of the arms where, he was so hot to start the season. I don't know if it was obviously the Phillies were doing great as well. And then they've kind of tapered off, but, got a nice series win against Kansas City, but he was someone who was just absolutely electric dominant for the first half of the season, gets injured, and he really just, June came around, really hasn't been the same. And then, he's injured for a little bit. He doesn't need to be, the 30 point per game arm he was in like May or June. But if he can get you low to mid 20s with, Skubal doing his thing and Reagan's doing his thing, that third arm, I mean, that's something that can really propel him over the top, especially now that you're playing teams that, for the most part have similar pitching as you. And then I'll give two X factors for the bats. I like the Colorado Rockies guys, but I'm going to give one. The first one I'm going to talk about is Luis Arias. Obviously he was the batting champ last season. Very decisive player in this league. A lot of people call him a singles merchant, but he was amazing last season. An over 6.5 point per game bat. There have been stretches where he's been great, but consistently he just hasn't hit the form that we saw from him in the past couple of from the previous season. If he can, get hot, just he's obviously not going to hit a lot of homers, but if he can just consistently rack up, multi-hit games and consistently put up, 6 or 7 points for a 3-week stretch, especially complimenting the likes of a Rafael Devers, a Vinny P, a Stephen Kwan, that'd be huge. And then another one I'll give a shout to. I don't know if he's much of an X factor, but Kyle Schwarber, someone who is very polarizing, hit or miss. Obviously, he's someone who's basically the king of the three true outcomes. He's either going to homer, strike out or walk. And a player like that can be really hit or miss. You can either get a week where he gives you 80 or a week he gives you like 10. So, if he gets the Schwarber that's hitting, 2-3 homers in a week and just absolutely mashing the cover off the ball, that's obviously a huge compliment as well. But he's also someone who can, lay an egg, and in a 1-week performance, that's something you don't really want to see. Got anything else to add, Bri, or should we advance to our next matchup?
I'd say we advance to the next matchup. I would say it's going to be a 70-point matchup.
670,
50-ish.
675. So what'd you say? 675, or what was the final score you had?
I got Tita at 675 and Bry around 750, 760-ish.
Okay, so I will agree with you. I think Bry will hit 700. I think honestly, as much as obviously Tita, Bruin as the underdog, the 17 matchup. I don't think the 17 Magic's going to happen this year. I think Bry's going to win about 700 to 700 for Bry, at least hit the 700s, and I think Tita will be in the low 600s. I think it'll be a matchup that will probably be determined, on the Saturday, or if not the Friday, but you never know. So the next matchup we will go into is the Hartford Yargoats against the Norfolk Tides. Paul, I think John Haidt was someone who was really, had a rocky season. I wouldn't even say rocky season. He went 16-4, but he had some up and downs. He suffered a couple of losses, didn't really run the table, but really, kind of finding his form. Two back-to-back 800-point performances from him, getting hot at the right time. Paul, I would say has been inconsistent the entire year. We've seen him, score in the 800s. We've also seen him score in the 600s. He's lost to, he's beaten some great teams. He's lost to some teams that he should probably beat. I think in terms of the teams that are in the top, if you want to dispute this, you can. I think he's the one with, the biggest disparity between his floor and ceiling, at least from what I see. I don't know if you agree with that point, but definitely can match the output of John Haidt. But this could also be a matchup where John Haidt washes him out. But we'll do the same conversation. MVP for him this season, X factor on him, beating John Haidt, and then, if he gets to that, advancing further in the playoffs.
So we're discussing Paul's team before Height's?
Yes, we are.
Yep. So for Paul, it's kind of been a roller coaster. I think he started 0-3, had some Dan Hurley run where he went 6-1 and something ridiculous, and he did upset Haidt in that time, if I'm not mistaken. But yeah, it's just not. I don't trust this team to beat a team that went undefeated last year. Paul's record did end up being 12-8 with a competitive point swing. This comes down to Julio Rodriguez for me. He traded Garrett Crochet, who is a top pitcher. He struggled a lot this year, but he has a top 10 fantasy talent. So if Julio goes off, Paul's team looks a whole lot better. If he doesn't, then it could be the team where I upset him. Gunnar Henderson is an MVP, and I think is Paul's MVP. But he was a lot better the first couple months of the year than he has been recently. And there are a couple players, Andy Pages, Matt Waldron, that were just optioned to AAA. So I think there are valid questions on how many resources Paul will have to throw at John. George Kirby, maybe my favorite pitcher. I think he's another X factor that hopefully goes off, but I'm not confident that Paul has the bullets here.
I think I would agree with you. kind of really stole a lot of what I was going to say. I think for the hitting, yes, it comes down to Julio Rodriguez. I agree with you. He's a top 10 talent. First 2 years in the league was one of the best bats in the league. 1,000 point bat in both those seasons, or actually 900 in his rookie year, 1,000 points in his second year. This year, just I don't know what it is. The Mariners have been, they're in the playoff contention, but for some reason, Julio Rodriguez just hasn't been able to find it really at all, or at least consistently. So he really needs a bat like that to compete with John Height's bats because, with the exception of Gunnar Henderson, we don't have to do a full position breakdown. I'd say William Contreras as well as in catcher. John Height has the positional advantage at every other position. And, you need someone like Julio to just have an absolutely amazing week if he wants to stand a chance against John Height. I agree with your point, George Kirby as well. Really hasn't been great in the month of August. One start above 10 points, and that was against the Pirates. He is pitching against the Angels this week. Is he in line for it? No, he's not in line for a 2-star week, but he's pitching against the Angels, who, are one of the worst teams in baseball. So if there is ever a time to do well, that is a team to do it against. Someone else, he just needs just one more great start from him to beat John. Blake Snell, former Hartford Yard Goat. Obviously Blake Snell has no concept of this league, but a little bit of a revenge matchup for him. Has been absolutely amazing since being activated. Gets a great matchup against the Miami Marlins, but he needs George Kirby to have a great start. He needs Julio Rodriguez to have a great week, and he needs Blake Snell to keep up his production. And then I'd agree with you. Gunnar Henderson's been his MVP. Hasn't been as great as in the beginning of the year. The last 30 games, he's been a 7-point per game bat, which is good, but obviously, not the MVP numbers we were talking about, in the first half of the year. But switching over to John Height's team, obviously, I think, I think the big thing for John is keeping up the pitching because his bats across the board are just phenomenal. It really will come down to if his pitching can, I don't even think, if he hits the level he had last week, like I said, he's going to win the championship by far, but he just needs them to not, implode on themselves, I would say. I think just getting your arms to be well, in terms of an X factor, I think there's a lot of pitchers you could say are an X factor. I'll point out Max Fried, but there's someone like Garrett Cole, who was a Cy Young winner last year, coming off an injury. How is he going to do over the next couple of weeks? Framber Valdez has been better, but throughout the year we've seen him waver a bit as well. I think there's a lot of pitchers you could say are his X factor because their ceiling is ace, but they haven't consistently pitched like an ace all season. For his bats, pick whatever one of Shohei Ohtani or Aaron Judge. They are batter number 1 and batter number 2, respectively. The MVPs of both leagues. You can go either one. I really don't care. But I'd say for John Height, I think he's going to win convincingly. I could honestly see this being a 150-point game, if I'm being honest. No slight to Paul's team. I just think John Height's team is just on another level right now. But the pitching is going to be the difference between him, not only winning this week, but winning it all. And as we've seen, it's been very up and down.
We can nitpick Height's pitching as much as we want, but he still has 6 starters that are averaging 20 points or more, and Garrett Cole's at 19.5 after missing 2 or 3 months. So I think the pitching is likely going to be fine, maybe if Cole is fully back for an ace. 2 observations for me. Paul is a very big proponent of great teams have great bullpens, and out of the elite teams, I think Heights maybe had the most turnover for how that looks. Tanner Scott was a lockdown closer in Miami. Now he's a setup man in San Diego. Paul Sewald literally lost his spot at one point. Luke Weaver, great waiver wire ad and has starting pitching eligibility, but has been a phenomenal setup man so far this year. So I would find it ironic if I somehow needs a great bullpen performance to pull this out. It's bananas that Shohei Ohtani has a 40-40 season with 1 month to go, but is not the number one hitter. Uh, if Judge, Betts, and Ohtani do their things, great. I made a wrong call on Ozuna months ago. He's been an elite bat. Um, Matt Olson's been a downer, but I trust him to bounce back. But so I think the X factor for winning it all might be Matt Olson. Like, oh, is that the one position where I could see John having some problems offensively? But I think the pitching's fine. And if Cole is back to being a full ace and Merrill Kelly just got healthy like 2 weeks ago, I think that is going to be convincing enough pitching to win it all. For this matchup, I think, yeah, this is going to be a greater spread than Tita and Bry will have. Let's say mid 600s to low 800s. Like, yeah, 100.5, 150 point matchup.
Yeah, I agree with you on the spread. I'd say that as well. Another thing to point about the bullpen comment, I do think that's probably the most shaky spot, but Kirby Yates has kind of solidified himself as that closer in Texas, the really one guy, and he obviously has Kyle Finnegan. But Ryan Walker, one of those waiver wire ads who was mainly used as a whole guy with starting pitching eligibility, became the Giants closer, I believe, last week or 2 weeks ago with the demotion of Camilo Duvall to AAA, or the option of Camilo Duvall to AAA. So, we always talk about that kind of getting that fourth closer, that fourth reliever spot. Ryan Walker, someone who can kind of supplement maybe for, Tanner Scott not being the closer anymore in San Diego. So kind of bounces itself out in that instance. But I agree. John Haidt, I think, will win convincingly, should win convincingly. So I'm excited to see how this plays. But the last matchup of this week is myself, the Clearwater Beach Dogs, versus the Portland Sea Dogs. We'll go into my team first. I think the same thing we've kind of been talking about, X factor for this upcoming week against Jab, but as the playoffs as a whole, and then MVP. Connor, I'll let you take the floor.
So a lot of the teams in the playoffs were who'd we'd expect. Paul has had some inconsistency, but fumbled into the 6th seed after being the 7th seed last year. Your team lost in the finals last year, but has had some very rotten injury luck to clear start. I think Bryce Harper, huge ad. I think he's going to be an X factor in a win. Jose Ramirez is the MVP for me. Clear position or premium position, 1,000-point bat. You know what you're getting. Very smart waiver wire ads. Pitching wise, like Shota Imanaga, you paid up for him and he has still performed. Electric first month of the year and still been solid since. Seth Lugo is also a top pitcher as well. So I think Imanaga and Lugo are going to be the deciding factors for a long playoff run. Other X factors, Nico Horner's kind of had, I'd say, a down year, but I think has the potential for more. So what are your thoughts on your squad going in?
No, yeah. I definitely agree with you. MVP. I mean, Jose Ramirez has been the one guy on my team who I also really hasn't dealt. I think him and Jose Altuve have been like the two like big players, I would say, who really haven't been injury ridden, at least in terms of my bats this year. I would say he's the MVP. Just another underrated season. And you're talking about, a 30-30 season from a guy 31 years old. Pretty impressive stuff. I remember, when I originally traded for him from Paul, that was kind of a big haul. I would say, I agree with you in terms of the X factors for my pitchers. I think it's Shota and Seth Lugo. These were guys who, halfway into the season were two of the best arms of baseball. I think Seth Lugo until like July or like it might have been June or July was SP1. Um, has come down to earth, especially as of late. Has a couple of good starts, but he got rocked by the Phillies today. Had a pretty bad start against Minnesota this month as well. Same with Boston. Just hasn't been a great August for him. He gets a matchup against Houston, which is not super favorable, but you kind of live with that. Shota Managa's kind of the same way where he's had some great starts as well, but he's also kind of gotten lit up. He has a matchup against Washington, which is a lot more favorable, I would think. So I think those are the two X factors because I think if I'm gonna win, given my injuries right now, I just don't think the bats are gonna, unless you get like unless you get all the bats clicking at the same time, I don't think the bats are gonna be the reason that like I could go far. It's gonna be like I'm gonna have to, get like 400 pitching points probably, and that means getting great starts out of, obviously the usual suspects of Chris Sale's been a huge ad for me, Zach Wheeler as well. But also, you need Shota Managa and Seth Lugo, or I need Shota Managa and Seth Lugo to hit the form they were on earlier in this year to kind of really bolster that rotation. In terms of a bat, I like the Nico Horner shout. I think definitely an X factor indeed. I'll throw another one, or yeah, I'll throw another one. Brent Rooker obviously has been huge so far, but just need him. You need the good with the highs with the lows. Didn't really have a great week this week, but has been a consistent bat throughout. And then obviously Giancarlo Stanton coming back from injury. If he can, get another, hitting behind Soto and Aaron Judge definitely helps. But I think those are two X factors because definitely going to need the bats to step up a little bit. Now we'll transition over to Jabs. Excuse me, Jabs Portland Sea Dogs. We will. So, what do you think for? Obviously, we'll run it down again. MVP of his team, but then also, the X factor for a deep playoff run.
Well, the MVP is Bobby Witt Jr. There's no question about that. I think the narrative to watch for Jab's team is I think he's a very big proponent of not thinking of depth too much. Have your stars, play them every day, react accordingly when something happens. And last week definitely was a tougher one, but we're kind of seeing now that if Josh Jung is pretty frequently injured, Cal Marte is injured, Jordan Alvarez we haven't seen for a while, then he's forced to roster Ramon Laureano. Ramon Laureano, who is DFA'd by Cleveland. So really, I do think that Jab's team is maybe the biggest wow factor for offense when everyone is healthy. Pitching wise, if DeGrom came back earlier than expected, that would be a huge boost. But realistically, I think it's going to come down to are the big names going to pitch? Luis Castillo is at 21 points per game. He has it in for more. Gavin Williams is a pitcher I really love, but he's kind of had a slow return from an injury. Edwin Uceda's a weirdly good free agent pickup. Recently been the setup man for the Rays. So if Jab wins and goes deep in the playoffs, I do think that it's good because the offense scores 450, 500 points, but we'll see what Alvarez and Marte's health is.
No, yeah, I agree with you on the Bobby Witt Jr. front. I think that's pretty obvious that he's MVP. Yeah, I think a big X factor is obviously, we'll see what happens with Jordan Alvarez. It's something we'll monitor. I agree with you. I think the X factor is, I'll just say, starting pitching as a whole. Has a very good bullpen with, Brian Hudson over in Milwaukee, Kenley Jansen, and like you said, Edwin Uceda has really slotted in nicely. Also has, Matt Strom is kind of that starter that you can throw in, and also Chris Bubik as a starter that you can throw in that will get you relief points or holds. But he doesn't really have a true ace. His highest scoring arm is Aaron Nola, who, is a good pitcher. I wouldn't say he's in the, I'd say he's probably in that second tier of pitchers. Um, Definitely someone who's just been consistent, but he's not like a superstar pitcher, in my opinion. Definitely can give you those performances. Definitely will need him to give you at least one, if not, three or four, if he wants to win it all. Outside of that, he has a lot of guys who have great, upside, but are prone to some inconsistencies. Luis Castillo, Gavin Williams, like you said, Bryce Miller, we talked about, has been on and off. I would say, with the exception of Nola, his most consistent arm has been Sonny Gray, who has done. But even then, Sonny Gray's gotten three straight losses, all with single digit outings. He gets a start against San Diego, who have been on fire. Nola gets a Houston start. So I think it's going to come down. Will he get great output from his starting pitching? Um, they're prone to have high highs, but also low lows. And if you get even a couple bad starts, especially looking at my team, which I think I'm third in pitching points, have been consistently in the mid to upper 300s for the past couple of weeks in terms of pitching. You get a couple of bad starts, and especially with the injuries to his bats, could spell an early exit for the Sea Dogs. I'm just looking. Castillo gets a Tampa Bay start, which is kind of huge. So I will let you start. What do you think is the outcome of this game? I think this is probably, in my opinion, the closest, or the biggest up in the air contest between these two teams, the two dogs. But what do you think this game's going to be? What do you think is going to win, and by how much?
Yeah, I think you made a phenomenal point that Jab's team has a lot of great Robin pitchers, but not many Batman ones. If your team won, it would be pretty easy to point to a Chris Sale, a Zach Wheeler, and be like, those guys were the ones you expect to show out, and they did. I think Jab's going to have a harder time with that. I do think that Jab is going to win this because if Jordan isn't pulling a Kyle Tucker, that is an additional 100-point bat this week. And Jab and Fight, I think their offenses are the two most wow factors. Um, I think this is going to be a 50-point matchup. I could see it being competitive going into Sunday, and I definitely think out of lower seeds, I guess you would have the best shot of pointed up. And I mean, your team made it to the final round last year. That could certainly happen again. But I do think that Jab offense and the number of Robin pitchers, Luis Castillo, Aaron Nola, is a tough matchup in the playoffs, especially a week after his down week where the team's due for a bounce back.
So I think this is the first time we're going to disagree, and I mean for good reason. I'm not going to pick against myself in the playoffs. Clean slate, 0-0. You got 1 week. I mean, obviously, you got 3 weeks to the championship. We got a 1 week matchup here. I'm going to go with my team. I mean, I think I have the pitching. I think if like I said before, I don't think Jab's pitching is super consistent. Now, obviously, he can, if the chips fall right, he can definitely match my output. And if that happens, I think I will lose. But I think my pitching will provide a significant advantage, and I think the offensive players I do have will be able to hold up just enough to where I'll be able to pull off in the end. I agree. This is probably going to be the closest of the three matchups. This will probably be the only matchup I think that will come down to the Sunday slate. I think the other two matchups can easily be, decided, by Friday or Saturday. I think this is the one that, if you're pointing to a game that's going to be really close, I would say it would be this one. Yeah, and I'm going to pick myself to win. I always, pick myself to win probably in that instance, but especially in the playoffs, I'm going to pick myself against Jab's team. Definitely we'll see how this works out. I'm excited. I think this is a fun playoff field regardless. And yeah, I guess we'll talk about one more thing. This won't be as quick, or won't be as long, because he doesn't play this week. But do you want to go over the same thing for Cody's team because I mean, although he's not playing, I still think if you want to spotlight, the MVP, and then we can talk about what could be the difference for him as he awaits whoever will come out of the first round.
Yeah, so Cody, of course, is the 1 seed, and with good reason, phenomenal owner. Pretty, I don't know. The pitching's been raved about for a while. The bats are there, and I don't know if outside of the last couple weeks of 700 points, there was no consistent like team's doing great, team's doing awful, very straightforward. Austin Riley being lost right as the playoffs are starting is devastating. So Nolan Arenado and Lawrence Butler have had different arcs their season, but I think how they fill in at third base is going to matter quite a bit. Um, Mason Miller is the first name that stands out to me, weirdly enough, because he is a lockdown closer with starting pitching eligibility. So we talk about having that fourth reliever, fourth closer. Cody literally has 5 bullpen arms that typically do terrific. Walker Bueller's been a disappointment, but every other pitcher has done great. Dylan Cease with 29 points, and he was comfortable enough to trade away Tyler Glasnow. The consistency is going to be there, and I do think that he exited in a 7-2 upset last year, and I do think Cody's going to win a round. Part of me still doesn't want to call him the presumptive favorite because I keep going back to the wow factor. I don't remember when his team has had a 500-point pitching output or 500 point offensive season. I think whichever team in the playoffs has those for 2 or 3 weeks in a row is going to be put in the best spot to win. So I can pretty confidently say, oh yeah, Zach Neo's probably quietly had a 2020 season. You know what Soto's going to do. You know what Duran's going to do. You're likely going to know what Mitch Keller and Logan Gilbert are going to do. But where are the 50-point performances consistently coming from? Where are the 90-point week for a bat? So I think Cody is going to win a game, but I'm not going to say he will win the championship.
That's a good point. I will say, I think in terms of he does have. I think if there is someone who will be that wow factor from the bats, it will be Juan Soto, who, he traded, a rare trade, I'd say, between two of the contenders. Or actually, no, he got him from Brackton, excuse me. But getting Juan Soto. So I think he's the biggest wow factor. But I agree with you. A lot of just, I would say, consistent guys. I'd say the next closest thing, I mean, outside, the Lawrence Butler insanity run has been Corbin Carroll, who, I I still think, it's probably more of just how he's performing in fantasy. He's been amazing so far. He's been amazing, really, I'd say since that slow start in the beginning of the year. He's been a 9-point bat in the past month or so. So that's probably the closest thing as well. But the arms, I think I agree with you. The Dylan Cease numbers also inflated by that the no hitter. He had a couple of other, high 40 starts, but since that no hitter, his last 6 starts, one start above 20 points. Obviously we know he can be an ace, but it's not always consistently there. And I think that bodes true for most of his starting pitching. He has what 1, 2. I mean, even Matthew Boyd's a 20-point per game arm. I guess it's 3 games, so I'm not going to really count that. But he has 1, 2, 3, 4, or 1, 2, 3, 5 20-point per game arms. But I think similar to Jab, he doesn't have a Batman. Well, Dylan Cease is the Batman of San Diego, and I think Logan Gilbert, that whole entire pitching staff's amazing. But he doesn't have, I would say, a top 10 starting pitcher. I could be wrong in that estimation, but I would say Dylan Cease is the closest, but we know how much he fluctuates as well. I think that could be the sign factor. I don't think he's got the wow in the pitching, but he's just got really consistent arms. So I think I agree with you. Luckily for him, he only has to win 2 weeks to crown himself champion. That's why he fought through the regular season to get where he needed to be. So yeah, I'm excited for this week. I don't know if you have anything else to add, but I think we can wrap up the final regular season or the last regular season week of this season, and then we'll be back next week with the first round of the playoffs.
Yeah, I guess to some parting words, it is the end of the regular season, and year two, I think both of us have really enjoyed seeing this league mature. It's going to be tough not talking trades, but these are going to be some high flying matchups. And after the season, we probably will have some awards to hand out. And I'm sure deals will flow again there. But a lot of these teams have the variance, others are consistency. But I think each matchup is definitely going to be worth watching. It's been a pleasure doing these regular season podcasts as well to show the world how great this league is.
No, yeah, I mean, definitely been a fun ride. Year two in the books. A lot of variance across the board. I would say, you know, I don't think there's really one favorite, like we said, to come out unlike last year. I mean, realistically, I could see at least four. I mean, potentially five teams winning it all, which I don't think was really the case last season. So I'm excited to see what happens. An electric slate indeed. If history has proven anything, we're going to get at least one upset. Uh, you know, I wouldn't be shocked if 2 through 4 advance, but if the league has taught us anything, one of these top seeds is going home earlier than expected, and there may be a couple of managers or GMs upset with how they performed in the playoffs. But I think that will do it for this episode of the Based on Balls podcast. We'll be back next week with as we recap week 1 or the first round of the playoffs, and then we'll preview the semifinals. It's been a great regular season, but we still got the playoffs. Take care and see you later.